Riding shotgun with me is Tom Scioli, Ahmed Piskor, Jim Mahfoud's in the middle, and the bass holding us all up, man, is Benjamin Mara. We're going to be talking about Miracle Man #9, and this is a kind of a famous issue, man. Highly controversial in that it depicts childbirth, which is pretty timid and tame now, but this caused a lot of bullshit in the mid '80s when this thing came out. If you have some old comics journals from around that
Hmm.
era, Steve Geppi at Diamond didn't distribute this
Hmm.
issue, citing it for being pornography. And what is in here is just a depiction of childbirth.
Yeah, yeah, pretty like almost like a medical text or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, and with that knowledge in mind about like this guy seeing it as gross or whatever, and I think he had to recant. I don't exactly remember the history, but there's going to be somebody in a kayfabe audience who was around who will add some illumination in the comments. I think he ultimately did end up distributing the thing after enough
Hmm.
arguing and shouting and people coming forward saying like, dude, it's just childbirth, like chill the fuck out. But he even had some kind of statement that was like, well, my job is to distribute, what you want, and if you want trash, I will ship you trash. So it was like it was that big of a deal. And I'm a big John Waters fan, and he's a film historian, and he would talk about like the earliest like nudity that you would see on the screen were called white coders, because it would be some guy in a lab coat who comes out, talks to the audience, breaks some fourth wall shit, and tells you about like the virtues of childbirth or something. And then it'll cut to some footage of some lady giving birth to a baby, but in those Eisenhower 50s, you just look past the baby and look at those parted pubic hairs and that freaking vagina. Just look past the baby, and like that's all those guys would see, and it's like that's what these misguided do-gooders of the 1980s who are trying to keep this comic out of people's hands were thinking. They were like looking past the fact that it's just there's nothing sexy about it
Hmm.
whatsoever, man. But they looked past the baby head and just saw a vagina.
And again, it's Alan Moore sort of testing the limits. It's like, okay, if this is no comics code, whatever, then why not this? And it's got sort of almost like it looks like the Surgeon General's warning, or like what would be on a pack of cigarettes on the front. Attention, parents! This issue contains graphic scenes of childbirth.
I bet that was the first time that warning was ever put on a comic up to this point. Do you know what I'm
For
saying?
sure.
Like, what other series would have had this on it at that
Right? Yeah,
time?
not like the birth of Franklin Richards or something.
Good on Eclipse for going through with
Hmm.
it too. I mean, that took some
I mean, this is
that took some guts.
this is how you change things, is by like being the test case. And like what a scary thing to do, kind of put yourself on, because like like with stuff with like the comic book legal defense fund and stuff, people do go to jail over weird stuff, like in these sort of like Reagan '80s.
And the comic book legal defense fund is a newish thing if it exists at all right here
Hmm.
and then and there are stores getting busted. This is the rise of the direct market and more comic shops in existence than ever. Basically,
Hmm.
the direct market has surpassed the newsstand distribution model.
And it's got like a Wild West feel to it.
Right, and one after another. I mean, you could pick up any issue of Comics Journal, and you will read about some hillbilly ass bullshit parents, man, who think that they're doing right by just making noise and getting shops busted or trying to get people put in jail for obscenity and shit.
Now, like, I don't know how the timing breaks down, but there was like a really famous, like, the Miracle of Life show that was like on PBS, probably like I'd imagine before this. That was kind of like showed childbirth and showed it in all that. Like, so I'm assuming that's what Alan Moore's kind of like. He's doing that for comics. He's like translating that into
Right.
comics.
We're getting the primo creative team is slowly solidifying, man. We have a John Totalbin cover that is fucking stellar.
It's just the first
Fantastic.
time Total Bin has drawn Miracle Man.
Yeah, the first time that we see it for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I love his sensitive approach to the figure. You know, he doesn't have to delineate
Yeah.
every single muscle. Could use a lot of just exterior contour. It's basically like when you see Adam West in that Batman outfit. It's you know, you don't see every piece of the six pack, or you know what I'm saying, man? Like
Right.
just the outer shape and some shadow.
The this like sort of like diagonal line technique. I feel like there was like sort of a generation of Kubert School graduates that would do that technique. That sort of like I don't know who started it. Maybe it was Total Ben who sort of popularized it. But that looks to me like an earmark of a certain era of the Kubert School.
Yeah, yeah, and he would be the spearhead of it, man. Whenever those guys were in class, like in you know their interviews and stuff, they would always talk about Total Ben like you know motherfucking him in a lot of ways, man, because he's the guy who could like read about some weird you know etching technique from the 1700s, disappear for a weekend, and then come back and like have mastered it already, you know. And you could see like just like with the foliage and stuff adorning this cover, it's like he's using a lot of weird stuff to get ink on the page, man. You know, those guys would often be asked, like, what do you use to ink? And they would have that flippant answer. It's like anything that puts a
what do
mark
you
on
got?
paper. Yeah, yeah. The ends of bananas and stuff. Jim Moffat, you have like one of the greatest YouTube videos ever when you're inking with that toothbrush. I sort of want to do a Google search and see how many hits that thing has now, because a portion of those hits definitely come from Pittsburgh.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, that is the old excuse, though, of like, well, whatever is available and, you know, already using the toothbrush for the ink spatter. So it's kind of like, what if you just thing and put it down? What kind of line are you going to get from that? So it's, you know, we're all experimenting with this stuff and figuring out things. All of us, I mean, we already know kind of like what obviously our tools are and what they do, but it's fun to like go outside of that sometimes too and just mess around and see what happens.
Total Ben is like one of my favorite book artists of all time, just because he's able to like render so many different textures. You know, I mean, all is on display in Swamp Thing for the most part, but he does a pretty good job in his Miracleman pages. And it's one thing that I think is lacking from a lot of mainstream that I just simply bounce off of mentally. Just there's this refusal to sort of try to make like use different texture, really get experimental with like how to apply ink to a surface. They just end up, I don't know, everything looks like it's rendered to be the same material in mainstream, which ends up becoming really unexciting to me.
Yeah, man. Like you know, with Jim Rugg and I doing the Wizard coverage, man, we're in those tumultuous 1990s, and we just did this one issue, number 43, where they highlight you know up and coming artists, and one guy is Mike Mayhew, who still is rocking comics and is doing good work, I guess. But he was working on some Zorro comic back then, and it was a prime example. It'll be on the video whenever that goes live, but like. It's the same like Scott Williams wannabe Jim Lee hatch lines on Zorro's horse, on the cape, and it's all this like metal double lighting, but it's a fucking horse, man. You wouldn't mistake any of those lines for fur. And you see that a lot in comics, man, for sure.
That's just showing the limited vocabulary and very specific eras of inking, of art styles, and you don't want to get stuck to an era. You want to find what your wheelhouse is, what your style is. That's the ultimate search for all artists, and for some people it's very challenging, but the worst thing you can do is become part of an era to where it just dates you and you're rendering a horse with fucking Williams double hatching or whatever. It just doesn't work.
It's very dangerous for a career. You know, back in the day when there's just Marvel and DC, those are the only games in town. That's when you would see, like, you know, Herb Trimpe's doing his, like, ersatz Jack Kirby thing. But then in order to get work, he now has to, like, draw Jim Lee style. And it's just like, oh, you poor bastard. You know, like, the coolest Herb Trimpe piece to me is, like, his Rolling Stone cover. with the Hulk, where he's just like drawing the way he draws,
Right.
you know. All that said, man, Rick Veitch is the guy on the ones and twos with the penciling and inking duties in this homework issue with the childbirth gimmick. He's no stranger to the revisionist superhero at this point. We'll say that.
Yeah, and he's in like his own realm of sort of psychedelia and inner spiritual journeys translated onto paper, you know. And even he prior to this, he did the Superman, the sort of Krypton one shot with Steve Gerber. That was like it was like a head shop Superman comic, you know, done like within Superman continuity, and it was like the last issue, you know, before the continuity switched over. So it was like the last word on, like, I think it was like, you know, like Superman Team Up or whatever that book was.
Rick Veitch is not shy about his past chemical endeavors. We'll say, and in terms of like when it comes to like my kind of top 10 list, he's on my top 10 list.
Yeah, I love Rick.
Right
I
on.
love Rick Veitch. I mean, like this issue, just as like speaking from like my inner fan or whatever, not as like a professional, but my inner fan. Like, I wasn't too thrilled with the art in it. Like, to me, it wasn't that different from the Chuck Beckham stuff.
Yeah.
Like this book is like, I'm still like sort of grieving the loss of that super dense, large stuff drawn for black and white, shrunken down and looking like a polished diamond. I'm still kind of like, oh,
That's
this still pales compared to, you know, like as like a pro or whatever. I can see that there is all kinds of like great stuff going on here, but just like my Miracleman fan is not satisfied.
I agree with you, by the way. Like with all I said about you know, Veitch is in my top 10. This isn't my favorite Veitch.
Yeah, me neither.
My favorite Veitch is Veitch doing his own thing. You know, but you know, this is a job.
Speaking of Veitch and this comic, Abraxas was like the code word that you know nixed Miracleman's power, and then like, you know, one of Veitch's things prior to this is like Abraxas the Earthman.
Yeah, serialized in Epic Illustrated.
Interesting. Yeah.
I wonder if some of the drawbacks from this issue for Veitch's work falls at the feet of the inker. Is it Rick Bryant?
Okay.
Rick Bryant?
Yeah, I kind of wonder how much, because there are some panels and there are some pages that do feel like, you know, they don't feel as strong as his other artwork or art endeavors. And I just wonder if it's just because he's not inking himself.
Yeah.
It feels like we're almost in like Veitch's like Eisner thing, but like we're not quite there. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's the inker, maybe it's the colorist, or maybe just like I would guess that this comic probably wasn't a high priority for
Right.
Veitch at the time. You know, he's like working on like Swamp Thing off and on, or whatever, you know, whatever like pro gigs he was doing that had like his full page rate, as opposed to this doing like as a favor to a friend or whatever.
Do you guys know the story of how Veitch came to this gig and how Chuck Beckham Austin was left? Because it seemed like in the previous issue that Chuck was coming back for this.
Yeah, I mean, when you read like the like the editorial pages and stuff, it seems like there's a lot of like spin going on of like, oh, well, Alan said this is like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another chapter, so we got this new one, you know, blah blah blah. But like, yeah, there's probably some internal drama going on.
And I wouldn't doubt that we would find answers to that in that Kimoto book that George Curie curated for Tomorrows, which is that book that I had that I was able to pull that pitch from. But obviously, like Rick Veitch, longtime collaborator with Alan Moore, they worked on Swamp Thing together, man. So they have experience working together. Not a bad comic.
Yeah, no, it's
This is the childbirth comic, man, and you know we got to see Miracleman as the deity in that splash page.
Oh, yeah, we have the scenes from the Nativity. So it's like, you know, the Nativity, it's going to be like the birth of Christ or whatever. But then Miracleman's kind of like flying in front of like a cross, like they're really like hitting you over the head with like the religious iconography, and it's kind of like, it's like, wait, so which one of these guys is Jesus again? Is it Miracleman or his kid? You know, or you know, and Veitch is so into this stuff. Like I think like that he has that Swamp Thing issue that never came out or whatever, where like Swamp Thing was gonna be the wood of the cross that Jesus was crucified to and stuff. You know,
Wow.
And DC's like absolutely not. You know,
Right.
Like DC wouldn't publish that thing today,
No.
let alone like in the 80s.
Right.
Yeah, there's nothing subtle about this splash page. They're
Right.
definitely conveying what the idea behind all this is to the viewer.
So this is the reunion as well for the Miracle Man character and Liz, his wife, man. She's fully pregnant,
Right.
so they have to make a big to do about that, man. It's been 4 or 5 issues since they were in the same room.
Yeah, this baby should be 3 by now. And they do, like, I feel like this is again like Moore's ongoing critique of like the Superman movies, where it's like this is like the "Can you read my mind" sequence, where like Moore was probably like, if he was flying through the sky with Lois Lane, she'd freeze her tits off, or whatever. Like, so this is like the response to that, where it's like, okay, if you fly through space, you're gonna freeze, or if you fly through the air with me, you're gonna freeze. So get in this truck, crank up the heat to maximum, and then like I'll fly you in this truck, which has become like I've seen Grant Morrison imitate this in All-Star Superman. Like this has become now like this is the way Superman or flying superheroes help their girlfriend get around, is by getting them in a car and then just flying the car.
That's sort of the thing that I think the people of the 80s like appreciated when Alan Moore came on the scene. It was just an extra level of thought when it came to these characters, and it allows for just like more creative interpretations of how the superpowers work and how they would work, in a world with characters who don't have those powers, So it's nice and melodramatic.
Yeah, and you have like again speaking to his attention to detail. It's like they're in Florida, they're flying over like the Everglades or whatever. So there's all these what's it called? Flamingos. This sea, pink flamingos flying the sea. And so it's like kind of like lyrical and poetic and fun, like a nice little break. And probably his response to like, "Can you read my mind?" Like where you could imagine like the music swelling here and this beautiful, all this pink going by, and she's enjoying it now. Like she's just had this horrifying experience. Now it's like some catharsis and some fun. She's honking the horn and just having a good time.
Alan Moore was great at taking what we've seen and just kind of pushing them a little bit further than where they had ever previously been. I think we've seen that throughout these issues we've reviewed so far.
So we dispatched Dr. Gargunza last issue. So we need some sort of foil, some sort of antagonist to exist in Miracle Man's universe. Cut to an interlude with these Jedi Knights, man.
Mm-hmm.
These Ben Kenobi types.
He said in that like little article, like where he was pitching this, he said, "I want to add some Star Wars to the 50s superheroes." So here's like very specifically this pencil is actually my identification. These aren't the droids you're looking for.
Right.
It's just flowing like, and that was in his pitch too, was that first he'd deal with Gargunza and then he'd deal with the aliens next. Who are like a whole other level, and it's just a logical, place for the story to go. It's like a logical next step. It really does like flow nicely.
So they are in like an insane asylum or whatever.
St. Crispin's hospital for the mentally ill children's ward. I don't know if there's like a Crispin Glover reference in there or something, or if it's an actual like
the famous Letterman episode was on the week the week that Alan Moore wrote the script.
Oh, that would be amazing.
We've uncovered something.
Yeah, let's pretend that's real. Let's
breaking news on Cartoonist Kayfabe.
And they're checking out young Master Bates.
Mm-hmm.
Young Anthony Perkins.
Mm-hmm.
In his little I guess they don't call it a cell. His little hospital room.
I mean, he's belted down to that bed.
Room.
How's it work? They're trying to see if he's going to be able to change back into his god form?
Right, yeah, he's the cuckoo. They refer to him as the cuckoo, and I'm guessing that's like a cuckoo clock, where like the Superman emerges like a bird out of a cuckoo clock and then goes back in. And
I saw that word cuckoo, and I immediately thought about like there's like that Grant Morrison X-Men where it's like the Stepford Cuckoos.
Right, yeah.
And I'm like, well, what's a cuckoo? But then we're in an insane asylum.
Yeah,
like,
one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
Yeah, it's a bunch of cuckoo people.
Yeah, but again, like a lot of Moore's symbolism works on like multiple, levels.
I like on this page that he's just in a black void. You know, we've established in the last panel, he's in a room in a bed, and that's all we need is that one simple shot of him. But then the next page, when the aliens are approaching him, you don't even need any environment. Right. It's just him in the black void, you know, and it emphasizes the danger and the emotional aspects of the scene.
Poor Johnny Bates, man. He is in a state of is it catatonia? Would you say that? Is that a real word?
That sounds right.
And
sure.
And what better way to sell that to a reader than to just have that black void? But then when the aliens split, and then you see that red hand come on the guy's head, on Bates's head, and you see Kid Miracleman standing like above this catatonic, you know, teenage boy. Which, man, we'll talk about the way Rick Veitch is able to depict young characters at some point in this issue. But you know, that's really cool. Like, that just really, like, it's a good cap on a very creepy scene.
Yeah.
The fact that there's, like, they came here looking to elicit something, and they want that Kid Miracleman, and they leave unsatisfied, but he's there the whole time. You know, we're really building this Kid Miracleman story, man, and man, it's gonna fucking pay off.
Yeah, and it's really like the extreme of like what Alan Moore talks about and what, like, you know, Miracleman talks about, of like, I feel like he's a different person. I feel like Miracleman and me are two different guys, you know, and this is like the extreme of that is Kid Miracleman.
There's no one better at there are some very good people who are using the 9-panel grid, but Moore is a master of the 9-panel grid. Like, each of these story beats and how much he's able to accomplish on this page with like the big panel up top and then just like the 6 successive panels.
Yeah, Moore is such a Ditko fan, the 9-panel grid. And then I think I also read somewhere like him saying that like Eddie Campbell kind of reminded him of the power of the 9-panel grid, and then that's when he started really embracing it.
We'll have to do From Hell eventually.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Ditko is probably like the grandmaster of the 9-panel grid.
Just one more thing about this like sort of black background and stuff. It really reminds me of like BBC dramas from that era. They have like, you know, no budget, shitty production. So there's like Doctor Who episodes. There's like the Elephant Man BBC movie and stuff where it's like just a black background and then the actors like doing their thing. So then you don't got to pay for lights. You don't got to build a set. You know, this kind of like Moore's kind of like probably everything he watches on TV has like this like at least a couple like scenes in utter blackness.
I mean, we could take this back to comics specifically, and Will Eisner in Comics and Sequential Art when he talks about, he calls out the stage as being his inspiration for laying things out, and he would often talk about like, you know, a street light is you know, street lamp is sort of all you need to convey like a certain amount, a certain kind of scenery piece or whatever.
I feel like he's like that Eisner's being a little bit disingenuous when he says that. He's kind of like I think that Citizen Kane was a huge massive influence on him, but it is again that anxiety of influence where you don't want to name the influence that's really your real influence. So he's like, oh yeah, the stage, and also he had these like sort of pretensions towards intellectualism, and so in his era it's like even cinema is kind of trashy. Like comics is garbage, cinema is kind of trashy, but then the stage, oh, that's, you know, that's the realm of Shakespeare. You know,
we're here to break kayfabe. What do you say, guys, man? Time to go into the childbirth sequence?
Let's do it.
So it's kind of juxtaposed along with, it's like the origin of this baby juxtaposed with the true origin of Miracleman.
Yeah, it's kind of like a recap issue almost. Like he's sort of telling you the whole story of his life juxtaposed with this sort of like hero's journey that this baby's going on, like the first hero's journey of just like birth. I don't know how the timing would work out, but I would guess that like he's probably has his Alan Moore has his daughter by this point, so he might have firsthand experienced the, you know, miracle of you know, being present for like a childbirth, and this might be like, you know, somewhat autobiographical and how it changes your perspective on things and makes the world like you get these very cosmic realizations out of it, and how like every like bad thing that ever happened to you in your life well, if one of those things was missing, like this child wouldn't be like it would be a different child or whatever, like the math just like the fact that you live in a world where this child exists made everything that came before it worth it. He kind of,
Right.
Do you think Alan Moore was practicing wizardry and cast when his daughter was being born?
There's a real easy way to figure that out because he declared himself a magician on his 40th birthday.
Yeah, when he was like Grant Morrison was a wizard before Alan Moore was a wizard.
Oh,
he
man.
like kind of got the idea from Grant Morrison.
Oh, you can't say that, man. We're trying to get the Alan Moore food interview, man.
So they allegedly.
We're trying to talk Alan Moore into letting all of us finish big numbers.
And 1963.
Yeah. So it's this really well paced, like this staccato rhythm, same amount of panels for 3-4 pages, with the origin sequence and this birthing sequence, man. So the rhythm of that, man, really sells the kind of labor because it's not just this like 1-2 punch.
Mm-hmm.
It takes some fucking time for that baby to squirt out, and when it does, man, that baby's as ugly as any first day baby you've ever seen, man. Little raisin baby. The curse would be, all babies are ugly as fuck like this when they squirt out, but like the curse would be if your baby always looks like that. When they grow up.
Yeah, not good. We were talking about photo reference in previous videos and having to use photo reference pre-internet, pre-Google, and the older artists had to actually go to libraries and do more digging, more research. If Rick Veitch actually had to like go to the library or watch one of those student films on childbirth, but I'm assuming photo reference is involved in these drawings of the kid actually coming out, and that was a more difficult thing to get back then, pre-internet.
Yeah, he's done to the microfiche or something.
Yes, he had to probably do some digging and do it in a way that he was not viewed as some sort of weird.
Yeah, somebody looking over his shoulder, like, "Hey, what's going on over there, Rick?"
Man, like, I had several homies, man, some cousins and shit, whose parents had books that had like the human sexuality or whatever, and if you just grabbed the 2 hardcovers and just like bent them out, it would go immediately to the page with like some pussy. Or like, a little head squirting out of a thing. Because like all the kids fucking would sneak into the library, like, grab that book and go to that page, man. So that ref is definitely out there, man. But this baby will give you nightmares, man.
Yeah, and there's like a close-up of the baby's face. And the baby's staring and like got these very intelligent eyes. And it reminds me of Darius Drum, the birth of Darius Drum in Jack Kirby's Silver Star. It's like this baby just kind of like looking at you, and I think like Darius Drum like says something like when he's born to
Is Silver Star a Pacific comic or a Topps comic?
It's Pacific.
Yeah, and so it would have been out.
It was already out.
Yeah,
it was like 1984, and this is 1986. And I know like I mean, just from knowing Moore's work, I feel like he is a fan of Silver Star. He has Darius Dax is a character he introduced into like the Supreme mythology, so I think he knows the reference.
And Rick Veitch has a son named Kirby.
Right, a huge Kirby, a daughter named Kirby.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So
that's a deep cut to pull out, Tom.
Well, that's what I'm here for, is the deep Kirby cuts.
And that's what this issue is, man. It's the childbirth issue, and we can't just let it be willy-nilly. This ain't no regular baby. The thing says mama in 2 seconds. 2 seconds after squirting out of mom's vagina.
And they're shocked. It ends on their shocked faces. And in Miracleman's face, it kind of looks like a Barry Windsor Smith drawing.
I think of it as a very, just the pacing of it and that ending is very EC Comics. You can almost imagine him saying like, "Good Lord, choke."
Yeah, or a plot.
Actually, that shot of Miracleman, that final shot of him and his wife. His face in particular looks like a Chaz Truard Animal Man face.
Yeah, he
really does. Yeah,
he's staring at Grant Morrison, the writer.
Wait, Ed, are you saying that Miracleman and Liz's baby is Grant Morrison? That's an alternate comic now that you have to draw. That's a whole other thing happening now.
That expression on Miracleman's face at the very end there, we just seen him do godlike things in the previous issue. I mean, even this issue, man, flying that vehicle, doing all this superhuman stuff. He looks very vulnerable right there.
Yeah, even he is humbled by the miracle of birth.
And to be continued, if I was reading this, picking it up every month or whatever frequency this thing came out, I would be very excited to get my hands on the next issue whenever that thing.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a fantastic cliffhanger to end on.
One thing I wanted to say actually about the back and forth part of the story where the childbirth is actually happening, and Tom, you talked about it, how he's sort of relating like all the events that led up to this moment. And when I was reading it, it felt like Dr. Manhattan's speech, Watchmen, when he's talking to Silk Spectre on Mars about, and when she's arguing the reason for humanity to survive. It sort of felt like this speech.
Yeah, it's the same kind of realization that like all the sort of bad things that happened in her life, there's actually like an order to and a mathematics to, and like and things had to be that way for me to be where I am right now.
Right. It's just like all the things that led up to her creation too, to this miracle of like her being there, of all the things in the universe, it's her in that moment.
And I feel like
interesting.
In this like sort of era of like sort of like therapy and being sort of enlightened or whatever, like these are now very almost like commonplace realizations that like that or mantras or whatever that people like sort of have to tell themselves to kind of get through life, is that to enjoy the ups and the downs of the ride of life, because it's all part, it can't just be good, it's all part of like this,
right.
Which was probably very like odd and revolutionary in the 80s.
Pretty incredible that he was able to pace this out into just 3 pages.
Yeah, because my recollection of this issue was that like almost the entirety of it was the birthing scene. But you're right, it is just like just a few pages at the end.
He has that amazing ability, man, to be able to pack content into these pages and still allow like a lot of room to breathe, man.
Yeah, I think things start like it becomes the next phase of Miracleman with the next issue, and then like we're really like setting up like this really like crazy ride that we're gonna go to for that third book of Miracleman.
Yeah, it's with issue 10 is going to end what Moore calls book 2.
Okay.
And then we're going to launch into things, man, with perhaps one of the greatest superhero battles in the history of comics.
Yeah, the return of the Titans, I think, is the way it's presented.
If you guys have nothing further, let's give some plugs and get the F out of here.
Okay, you can follow me on Twitter at Tom Sholey or at Tom_Sholey on Instagram. And January 29th is the Treasury edition of Fantastic Four Grand Design. And Free Comic Book Day is there's going to be the Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, my biographical comic book, graphic novel, whatever, about the life of Jack Kirby.
It's a good year, man. 2020 is a good shield year, man. How about you, Jim Mahfood?
Yes, Jim Mahfood on Twitter and Instagram. And if this is still going up before the end of January, we have the Pop-Up Funk pop-up book on Kickstarter. You can just Google Pop-Up Funk Kickstarter, and you will find the page and grab the book if you can. We have a bunch of awesome incentives and bonus material and merch, so it's going to be pretty cool.
Awesome, man. Ben?
BenjaminMara.com, Benjamin_Mara for Instagram, _BenMara_ for Twitter, and you can find my books at the Fantagraphics website or on Amazon and in cool comic book stores everywhere.
All the homies have links directly below this video. There's also a link to the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter. Get on that stuff. Jimmy and I are updating that thing probably on a bi-weekly basis. And I also encourage you guys to come hang out with us next week and read more comics. More.